Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our November Café Scientifique presentation. My name is John Willis, and I'll be your host this evening. Now, of course, you've all come prepared. You know that this evening we're going to hear about ORCASAT, UVic's very own satellite mission. And before I introduce this evening's speaker, let me just give you a quick heads up of what to expect. So we've got the talk as usual, and it's going to be no PowerPoint as usual. But Afzal, our speaker, he showed me when I went to kind of have a chat with him to sort of let him know what an evening looks like. He showed me a couple of wonderful videos. No sound required, no close inspection required, but they're time-lapse movies of the assembly of the satellite. Okay, so you'll have a wonderful visual picture of what it actually takes to put this together. Now, it runs for about an hour. And you don't have to watch it for an hour, but it's going to be on these screens as Afzal is talking to you. Okay, same thing on each screen, and it's just going to kind of be running in the background. And just to let you know that you can kind of dip in and out of it. It'll give you a sense of what he's talking about as he's talking, but he's not going to refer to it specifically saying you must pay attention now. Because I know that sometimes it's a little bit difficult to see the details there, but hopefully everybody's going to have an acceptable view, you know, of just to get an impression. You're welcome. So our speaker this evening is Afzal Suleman. And he is a professor in UVic's Department of Mechanical Engineering, and he's going to tell us this wonderful story this evening about ORCASAT. It's an incredible achievement for UVic and a wonderful story, and I guess I'm priming you because it's launching in just under 2 weeks, and hopefully you're going to see a lot of coverage on CBC and Times Colonist and local news outlets, and you'll be able to say, I was there. I know what's going on, and I'm connected. Okay, so I'm looking forward to a wonderful talk. I'm sure you're looking forward to one as well. So please join me in welcoming Afzal Suleman, and let's hear about ORCASAT. Thank you very much.
Okay, hi, good evening, everyone. So when John asked me to participate in this wonderful event, and I didn't even know that it existed actually, and when I just see here, I think it's a great idea that John has come up with, and to share some of the experiences and the work that we are doing at UVic. But then he said to me, no PowerPoint, and I started getting nervous. You know, when you're an academic, the first thing you put is a PowerPoint and just stroll to the PowerPoint. And then he said to me, okay, you don't have to be very technical about this. So he said, describe your journey about how ORCASAT came up to become a reality. And it is quite a big sort of milestone, both from the UVic perspective, from British Columbia, and for Canada, because this is the first built in BC, designed, built, and flown in BC, first satellite. So it was essentially an effort that it is a collective effort. A lot of students participated in this. I think we had over 60 students that basically participated in this effort. My colleagues as well from physics department, Justin Albert. I don't know if he's here, but he said he might be here today. And then there was a lot of students, and there were some volunteers as well, co-op students. So it is a collective effort, I must say, and the students are the ones that are every day working, and my job is to make sure that they have the right conditions and right resources to carry the work. So And then I said, John, I'm going to talk about ORCASAT. It's a little bit too technical, and how do I explain technicalities without PowerPoint? He says, no, just describe your journey. How did I basically came to this point, or how ORCASAT came to be? So, and I say it's pure serendipity. It was essentially things happening over the past 30 years, 40 years that have culminated in to this point. So how did it start? And I'll start not from the beginning. I'll start maybe halfway or 1/3 way of my life. That was when I was in my 20s. And I was studying I was at Imperial College in London at the University of London there. And I was doing my master's. And it just happened that during my master's, and I was in aeronautical engineering, and one of the requirements for that master's was that we had to do also, not besides our thesis work, we had to do a project. And I was somehow interested in the space area because I was mostly working in aeronautical, in aircraft and aircraft design. But I said, oh, that's interesting. There was a professor there, and he was not even in engineering. He was in management science. And he was working on the solar sail spacecraft. And this was 1984, 85. And so I went to talk to him, and he says, yeah, we are looking at the solar sail spacecraft. And I would like you to do, since you are coming from the engineering side, can you basically make sure, are you able to tell us that what are the characteristics, the structural characteristics, the dynamic characteristics of a massive platform in space that would basically span potentially a kilometer in size? And these are what we call the solar sail spacecraft. That is essentially the solar pressure that drives and propels these spacecraft. And this is essentially a concept. It has never came to fruition because it's such a out of this world concept in a way. So I did all the analysis, and then when I finished my report and my part of my requirements to graduate, he says, oh, there's a conference which is the International Astronautical Federation Congress in Stockholm. And he says, why don't you go and present this at the International Astronautical Federation Congress in Stockholm? And I said, okay. He says, there's no funding. You have to figure out your way to get there. And I said, okay. I said, I'll figure out a way to get there. So to friends, this is what happens at the university when you are young, is that, people are friends of people. And then a colleague of mine that was in my department, we were good friends. And he says, oh, don't worry about it. I have a good friend of mine that lives in Stockholm. I'll call him, and you can just stay in his living room. You don't have to pay hotel. Just figure out a way to get there, buy a cheap ticket. At that time, we did not have Ryanair or EasyJet, nothing like that. It was the normal flights that we usually have. So I made my way to Stockholm. I presented my. There was this in this event. It was quite interesting because I was a young, sort of stars in my eyes, right, being in this big congress for the first time, and I was coming from Imperial College. I was not even British citizen. Going back, I'm a Portuguese citizen. I'm originally from Portugal. So at the end, media came to talk to me. There was a media event, and they said, "Oh, you are representing the UK." And I said, "No." I said, "I'm not British." He said, "No, that's okay. You are the only one that here from the UK, so you can talk about the development of this solar sail spacecraft." There was a lot of interest at that time. So I basically talked about, and then that evening. So that was my first time that I met, during that Congress, the first woman in space, which was a Russian cosmonaut, Valentina. So that was really another big sort of experience for me in meeting this Russian cosmonaut at that time. And in the evening, we were hosted by the King of Sweden, King Carl Gustaf, at the City Hall in Stockholm. And I have still the picture of the whole event there, with all the people having mingling and having drinks. So at that time, just going through this, I meet a professor from UBC there. And we talked for about 20 minutes, and he was working at UBC in the area of space dynamics and large space structures, very much related to the work I did in the solar sail spacecraft. And So we talked briefly, and I said, yes, I was at Imperial, and I had already started my PhD at Imperial in the area of airframes and aircraft composites. And he says, oh, you know, he was working with NASA, projects with NASA. And I said, I'm interested in the space area. He says, oh, send me your CV, and we'll talk about this. And I said, sure. I just mailed him my CV. I think it was emailed at that time. And then a few weeks, or I think it was a couple of months later, I got an email saying that he would accept me to do my PhD at UBC in Vancouver. And then I started looking. I said, Vancouver, what is Vancouver? I said, I had never heard of Vancouver in my life before. And I said, oh, I went there, and I said, oh, this is like at the other end of the world. I said, wow, okay. But I didn't know how beautiful it was. I just knew that there was a university here, UBC, and my connection was the professor, Professor Modi at that time. And he has passed away. Unfortunately, he passed away quite a while ago. And so we discussed briefly, and now I have to make a decision. Do I stay in England and make my life in England, or do I just pack up my bags? And so it was a difficult decision, because when I tell my parents, we were in Lisbon, in Portugal, and I said, oh, I'm going to Canada. And my mom, first thing she says, no, you are not. And I said, no, I think it's a good opportunity. I don't know anything about Canada. But it would be a good, I think I should, I'm too young to settle down. As I said, I'm only 25, so what I'm going to do, and settling down here. So let me just explore the other part of the world. And I just came in '86. I remember it was the 22nd of August, 1986, when I landed in Vancouver. And when I looked and I landed, and I said, I was coming through Granville Street. And then I had bought a one-way ticket. That was my another good mistake, I would say. And then I said, oh my God, what a small town. What a boring town, right? Because coming from London, you can imagine London is like the center for young people. It was really exciting to be there. And so I just started getting into this thing, and I started doing my PhD at UBC. And at that time, my supervisor, Professor Modi, said, okay, look, I'm working on this project on the space station. The space station was a concept at that time. So the International Space Station, he says, we would like to, he has a project with NASA where they're looking at the levels of microgravity. And if it's possible to continue doing these microgravity experiments in the laboratory module, knowing that we will have all these extravehicular activities of the astronauts. We have the Canada arm, which was basically the mobile remote sensing arm. And we will have all of these systems moving and creating levels of disturbance. And what are the levels? I mean, if we are talking about microgravity experiments, what are the levels of microgravity due to the accelerations that are we able to maintain within certain thresholds that we will continue to be able to do these microgravity experiments? So this was like a pure computational model. It was like the code that I developed at that time was like 50,000 lines of code that I had to develop to model the dynamics of this space station. And at that time, for the first time, I remember in 1980s, or late 80s by that time, that with the Department of Computer Science, we did all the simulation and graphics of the space station and tried to simulate its basically the vibrations on the spacecraft. So eventually, in '92, I defended my thesis, and that was it. I was basically on a student visa, and then I said, I'm basically going to go back now to Portugal and then continue my career there. And it just happens that during that time, I was walking in the corridors of in the hallways of in our department, and I see this National Academy of Sciences in the U.S., where they accept students, or maybe postdoc students. And so I applied to the National Academy of Sciences. So a couple of months later, I got an email from the U.S. Air Force. That was one of the labs that would host postdocs from foreign postdocs. And I said they will accept me as a postdoc at the U.S. Air Force in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I found it a bit interesting that in an American Air Force would accept me as a foreign national. But those were different times. I must say that those were very different times. And the reason that I ended up in the Air Force was another funny story. The commander of the Flight Dynamics Lab, he had been to Portugal, and he loved Portugal. Right? And then when he found out that I was Portuguese citizen, he says, oh, bring him along because he is one of us. So that was the reason that I was accepted to be at the Portuguese Air Force, just because of the commander of the flight dynamics lab. So I stayed there for 2 years. But when I got there, I told my supervisor there, I said, look, I've been working on large space structures. And he says, no, just put it aside. You have done 5 years of your work in PhD, that's enough, right? You're going to work now with the next generation fighter jets. And there are these issues or aeroelastic issues in fighter jets. So you're going to basically model that, and then you're going to figure out how to control that, so we can increase the envelope of these fighter aircraft. So I started working on that, mostly at what we call the fundamental level, because I could not be working at the applied level too much because of the security clearances, but everything was done at a very fundamental level. So I stayed there 2 years, but before that, so I go back to the 2 years I stayed. In '92, when I was finishing my PhD, again in the halls in the department, I see this International Space University. And I said, wow, interesting concept. This is like a summer course that they do, like it's about 2 or 3 months. And the International Space University gathers students from all over the world. And every year they have this summer program in space studies. It just happens that that year was in Japan. And I sent my application in the January of '92. And I got basically a reply saying that I was accepted to go to the International Space University in Japan, and with scholarship, which was helped for me to make a very quick decision that I'm going to Japan this time. So I spent 3 months in Japan. It was a wonderful experience with 130 individuals from NASA, from JAXA, from European Space Agency, from Brazilian Space Agency, from Russians at that time, they were also there. And we were 130 people there and working on real problems of basically, again, was large space structures, and then we had really like very specialist people in the field from all of these centers and companies that would come and give us lectures. And we had an exam at the end, we had to do a project, but mostly was the cultural integration within the Japanese society. That was the most wonderful experience that I had there. So I came back at that time, they defended my thesis, and in August of '92, and then I took off to the Dayton, Ohio, to be there for 2 years. So I thought that my area, my space ventures were done, because now I was working again back in the aircraft development. It just happens at the end of '94, so just a big asterisk, I should mention that the reason I'm back in Canada as well is that in '92, I met my wife at UBC. She's sitting right there. And she was the reason that I had to come back to Canada, because she said, it's Canada or nothing. So I said, okay, we'll figure out a way to come to Canada, right? So in '92, so when I finished my 2-year tenure at the US Air Force, I went to visit my parents in Portugal. So I had not seen them for a while. So I went to visit them, and my dad was not doing very well at that time. So what happened was, I said, oh, I'm going to be in Portugal. I'm going to go to give a talk at the University of Lisbon. They had just started a new aerospace program at that time. It was a brand new first aerospace program in Portugal. So I gave a talk, and the chair of the department, and he comes and says, oh, we're going to take you for lunch. And I said, sure, we'll go for lunch. And he says, you know, we have a new aerospace program, and we are looking for someone with your background. And would you like to come back to Portugal? Would you like to come to Portugal? And I said, I haven't thought about it. My wife is Canadian. I don't know. She's in Vancouver, so I have to basically have a discussion, a family discussion about this, because it's a big decision. And he says, yeah, but let us know quickly, because I have to apply for your work permit. And I said, no, you don't, because I'm a Portuguese citizen. I can come and go anytime I wish. And he says, oh, you're a Portuguese citizen. I said, yeah. He said, you're staying here. He says, we'll talk to your wife. Don't worry about it. We'll convince her and things like that. And I said, okay, look, I understand that this is a good opportunity for me as well to start a brand new program in aerospace. So I said I started the program, and I developed all the courses that, the third and fourth and fifth year courses in specialist courses in flight stability and dynamics, aircraft structures, aircraft design, satellite dynamics, active dynamics, orbital mechanics. I started developing all these courses in Portuguese, because at that time, everything was in Portuguese there. There was no English. So I developed all these courses, And then only when the Bologna basic agreement came up, then with the masters, everything became English. Now, the 4th and 5th year, the master's level course, they teach in English there in Portugal. And it just happened that during this time, was 6 years that I was there, developed the whole program. And then at that time was getting a little bit difficult because my wife and I, we were away for 8 years since we got married. So she was in Vancouver because she's a faculty as well. She teaches computer science. And I was teaching there, so 2 careers we had to manage and try to reconcile that. So in 2000, that was, and then, so I came to give a talk. I gave a talk at UVic and UBC and SFU. It just happens that the chair of the department in mechanical engineering at UVic, he says, "Oh, you wanna?" I said, "Yeah, I would like to come back because my wife is a faculty in Vancouver, and we are trying to reconcile our family life, and with 2 kids now. We had 2 young kids, so it was not easy." And so what that brings up to the point where the chair of the department tells me at that time, he says, "Oh, you know, there's a new program by NSERC, right? That you can bring money from industry, 50%, and NSERC has got an industry support program that they give you 50% and makes up your salary of $60,000 a year." And I said, "Okay, so let me just see it." And I figured out, I said, "Give me 6 months to contact some companies and we'll figure out how to develop a program." And said and done, a company in Ontario, another company here in Coquitlam on the international submarine engineering. And because I was working at that time in this, what we call the adaptive smart structures for application in aircraft and generally all the robotics and so and other fields. So I said, yeah, I managed to convince them to hear the 2 letters, and it took me 6 months to basically do the pitching of these research ideas. And I said to the chair, here it is, the 2 letters, $30,000 for 3 years they have committed. And then he looks at me almost like, and I said, I look at his face, and I said, something is not right here. He says, "I'm sorry, but NSERC has canceled that program." Right? And I said, "Oops, okay." I say, but he said, "Don't worry about it. We'll figure out another 30,000 from our other sources." So that's when in 1999 I came as a limited term faculty to UVic. It was in 99. In 2000 I became a 10-year track at that time. So that was the time that I started now developing the program, and slowly I started, and that was the question I had from the beginning. I said, look, I'm in Portugal. I said to my wife, I'm in Portugal. I am representing Portugal at NATO. I'm a national delegate at NATO. I'm a national delegate at the United Nations now and the Committee for Peaceful Use of Aerospace. And we have a new aerospace program. And I said, what I'm going to do at UVic? You know, like there's no aerospace there. So my wife said, you create it there, you can create it here as well. So there's no, you can steer the whole thing and start all over, and there's no problem with that. So I said, okay, so let's just start. So I started this aerospace research in 2000 at UVic. That was 22 years ago. And slowly I started building the capability, and then it brings up, so I'm trying to bring you up to where ORCASAT comes. I think I'm taking too much time. But anyway, so at that time, it was interesting because this was in 2000, so and then eventually, because of my, still I kept all my friends at the US Air Force, and I met them at the conferences, and we would go for lunches and dinners, and always kept that networking going. And they were developing this new program on sensor craft program with the US Air Force with Boeing. And I said to them, I said, look, I can build this aircraft, because I was working with the Portuguese Air Force in building UAVs at that time, the drones. Since 95, I started building drones with the Portuguese Air Force. And we were flying them. And I said, I can do it here as well. Same thing. There is no, I got all the capabilities in Victoria to do that. We got good students, and we can build a program. So they said, okay, we'll give you a contract to go to UVic, and at UVic, and you can build these sensor craft. These are basically drones, 5-meter span, with jet engines, and then we flew them in Alberta, actually, at Foremost in Alberta. But that's another story. I'll leave it for my next talk. But at that time, I started developing, but I went to my dean and my chair at that time, and I said, look, I'm bringing a small amount of money, about $400,000 from the US Air Force, but I need space, right? And they said to me, no, there is no space for aerospace. I mean, where are you going to build aircraft here? And they said, there's no space. And I said, look, this is a unique opportunity to bring collaboration with the US Air Force. And they said, no, I'm sorry, we cannot do anything. And they basically said there was no space for me. So what I did was I went back to the US Air Force. I said, does it matter to you that if you do it with UVic, the contractor, you do it with me directly? There's no difference. Same students will be working, except I'll be paying them directly. This does not make a difference on the program. And I'll build the whole thing from zero. Don't worry about it. So then I rented a place in Sydney, built a lab there with the money that they gave me, and started recruiting co-op students from UVic, masters and PhDs, right? And they were working there. They were doing their degrees at UVic, but they were working for my company there. And as the thing developed, we built aircraft, we flew it in Alberta, and the Sydney News gets hold of it. A journalist gets hold of one of my students, and he started talking, and there was a big article in Sydney News saying that aerospace activities or aerospace research in Sydney. So I get called by VP Research Office, and they said, what's happening here? And I said, you told me to bugger off, and I said, here I am. They said, no, can you bring this back here? I said, sure, give me space, and I'll bring everything back here. I'm just doing it because I was not willing to give up on this project. And they said, okay. So then we had now exactly 10 years ago, we created the Center for Aerospace Research in Sydney, at the airport, in the industrial basically park there. So we have now, basically I have about 20 engineers full-time working there, and there are another 10, 15 masters, PhDs, co-ops. And we've been working with Bombardier, with Boeing, with Embraer in Brazil, with DSTL in the UK, and so on. So we create a lot of projects. So it has become a very dynamic. So now it brings me up to, I don't know how much time I've taken already. So sorry. Okay, so I got another 15 minutes. So it brings them to ORCASAT. So what happened to ORCASAT was, because of my connections back to International Space University in Japan, so Larry Reeves, who was basically part of this alumni organization of International Space University, he contacted me with this idea of creating the Canada Satellite Design Competition for students. And he says to me, will you be part of it? And I said, sure, count me in. And then I just talked to some undergrad students at UVic, and I said to them, are you interested in aerospace? We have this project. There's no money in it, but don't worry about it. We'll figure out money later. At the moment, I just need your buy-in into this idea that we create a space program at UVic, right? The students were all in, and they are wonderful because they do a lot of work. They're volunteers, and they do basically a lot of work. And then slowly I started developing. They competed in this Canada Satellite Design Competition, and we came first. Our first try, we came first in Canada, right? And that was quite an amazing. I was so happy with the students. I said, you guys are really good, and they are good students actually. So we won the first place in that year, and then we started developing, and suddenly now came the Canadian Space Agency comes up with this competition. It's not a competition, but just a program that they would give $200,000 to 15 universities across Canada. And that was $200,000 to build a CubeSat, right, which is one of those miniature small satellites. And I said, 200,000? I said, Canadian Space Agency, are you serious? I said, 200,000, I don't even get out of bed nowadays. It's like, you have to talk about $1 million or over to build a satellite and put it in space and all these things. They said, no, that's all we have. You have to find funding from somewhere else. That's your problem, right? I said, okay. As always, I said, that's fine. But the students started buying in and started getting. So with that money, I basically recruited a full-time project, basically the project lead that would be there full-time. And then there were a couple of two co-ops, and then it just built up, and then another 30 or 40 were volunteer students that were interested in the topic, in satellites. So it came up to a point where we started developing it, and then the students started working on it, and then so we have so many aspects of the satellite about orbital mechanics. We have thermal issues, we have structural issues, we have power systems, we have attitude control and attitude determination and control systems. So, and the onboard computers, all these things had to be now parsed out. And then I had to find the experts in each area, because I'm not an expert in everything, but I understand how to integrate them. But my expertise mostly is in the structural and thermal area and attitude control and dynamics. So I had to find a professor that is, so Justin Albert, who's a colleague from physics, he was responsible for the payload. So the idea, and he came up with the idea of what the satellite, what would be the science mission. And he said the science mission is that there is an issue. So that's why ORCASAT stands for Optical Reference Calibration Satellite. That's what it stands for, ORCASAT. It just worked, the name worked out, and the acronym was wonderful because we are in BC. Orcas are our symbol anyway. So I said, okay, so let's just, so Justin came up with the idea that we can now, what we can do is that he was doing a lot of research with balloons before. And he says, we have a problem with the ground-based telescopes. So the ground-based telescopes essentially have a problem because of the atmosphere, that the images that they get are not very clear, right? And that is because of what we call the atmospheric aberration, right? So one way to solve the problem is that if we are able to put a light source above the atmosphere, and then we just beam that laser into the ground station, into a particular ground station where the telescope is. The telescope base could be in Hawaii or could be in South America. So if we beam those down, they receive they receive the light. So what this satellite is doing now, it will emulate a star, right? But we know what is the wavelength of the laser that leaves the satellite. And we know what is the wavelength at which the ground-based telescopes will be able to receive it, because they measure it. And with that difference, they will be able to calibrate the images. That means that the images become much more clearer and crispier by looking at this, essentially by compensating for this aberration of the atmosphere, right? So that was basically the science of the project. So we started developing, so this is the 2U. So the CubeSats are divided into cubes. That's why it's called a CubeSat. You can have a 1U, which is a 10 centimeter cube, 10 centimeter by 10 centimeters, 10 centimeters in all three, it's like a cube. And you can add as many cubes as you want. So what we decided was to say, okay, we'll develop a 2U cube. The 1U will have all the attitude control systems, the power systems, the onboard computers, and essentially all this, what we call the bus of the satellite. And then the other 1U will be the payload. And the payload would have like an integrating sphere, and the sphere essentially is the laser basically gets bounced off inside the walls of the sphere, and there's a diffuse light that comes out. That's why we were able to basically get licenses to basically have this in space. Otherwise, we will not be able to get a license, right? So that was basically the thing. So what happened was, so you see mostly the videos that you see is part of the 3 years of integration of the satellite. And then in June, the team went to the Canadian Space Agency, and they delivered the satellite to the Canadian Space Agency. They did all the integration into the deployer. So there is a deployer that is basically a company in the US called NanoRax. And NanoRax is the one that is responsible for taking this deployer with the CubeSats inside the deployer. And then the idea, the goal is that on November 19th, which is not this week, but next week on Saturday, we will have, the satellite will be launched by SpaceX. It will be the Dragon crew that will be going to the space station, and it will be delivered to the space station. And then the idea was to, a week later, to have it deployed. We're using an extravehicular activity. The astronaut will come out of the space station, and then with the deployer, we just launch. And there are 2 satellites. We were the first teams that finished on time, were us, and then there was Dalhousie University. So the 2 universities were there together, integrating into this deployer, and we basically handed out the satellite to the NanoRax. They have taken with them. At the moment, it's sitting in Florida, ready to be deployed next Saturday. And there will be an event, a live event, that we'll be doing at UVic on that Saturday at 2 p.m. That's the scheduled launch of the SpaceX rocket. And once it goes into orbit, and it goes to the space station, and then we'll have to wait. So we were hoping that a week later, we basically would be getting news that it has been deployed, and we have built a ground station at UVic with antenna, so we can track the satellites and we can basically communicate with satellites. It was built from scratch. Now it's completely ready to be operational once the satellite is in orbit. And then just a funny story that I'll say. My wife will not like this story, but I will tell anyway. Was it last week that I got a call from Canadian Space Agency? Oh, we have bad news. Is that NASA is so busy, and the space station, the astronauts are so busy with so many tasks there, we will not be able to launch the satellite until the 2nd of January of 23. This is from the space station. So this is the basically put it in orbit, which is not to launch it from here. The launch will be the 19th, and that's basically the date. So I said, oh, 2nd of January, what interesting. But I said we might have a problem because the battery life of this in the satellite might have a problem. It might be depleted. If you get depleted below a threshold, we might have trouble getting it back into. But we did all the calculations. I said, no, by the 2nd of January, we might have about 40% of battery life left because we did some tests here with other batteries, and that's what we have calculated. I said, you have just saved me a lot of money, I said. And they laughed, and I said, yeah, 2nd of January is my 30th anniversary that I married my wife. And I don't have to buy a diamond ring. I said, look, I have a spacecraft just for you. And so that's what we are planning to do. And so there's a funny story around it. So that's how ORCASAT has came to be at UVic. And so now we are developing a program that essentially will have, like, there's another call from Canadian Space Agency again to do a satellite competition. One great news that we got was from NanoRex, which is an American company that does the deployment, that does this develops, and is responsible for the launch. And they said that from what they have seen in there, they have dealt with 200 CubeSats from all over the world. And they said that our satellite was the top 5 in quality and construction. Like the way it was built, it was like the top 5 they have seen ever. And that was another, basically, and again, so it was interesting to see how the students were so committed to making sure that we were doing like a really very, very professional job. It was not like a student, it does not look like a student project. It was like almost like a professional industrial scale, industrial quality type of satellite that was built, and it was put in space, or it will be put in space. So that was essentially the story of the ORCASAT, and now with a new call that it is due on the 23rd of November. So now we have built a bigger consortium with a professor in physics, some of my colleagues, and Nick is here as well, that will be part of the team. We are now developing a new proposal for developing a 3U CubeSat. And the goal of this CubeSat, they said, the Canadian Space Agency said that they're more interested in climate monitoring and climate change, and can we basically get some more data on what is happening with the climate and how it's affecting Earth. So what we are doing is that putting sort of a payload, which is essentially radio waves, and that have got in the frequency range of about in the megahertz to gigahertz. So we can measure typically some of the composition of the ionosphere at 14 megahertz, and then at 3 gigahertz we want to measure the moisture content in atmospheric rivers, and especially to see how it's affecting BC. And the third one is with the geography professor, is to look at the color of the oceans to see how basically the color of the oceans are changing over time, so that we can see how it is affecting the basic marine life and so on. So this is the next project, and potentially in another 3 or 4 years, we might have another launch, and if everything goes according to plan. And by that time, I'll be ready to retire as well. So yes. So that will be the plan. But again, I mentioned, so I got another. So where it all started, I mean, I did not grow up with the idea that I was going to be in space. No, that was not. I was born in Mozambique. So that was where I was born, in Africa, in South Africa. So I spent the 20 years of my life there, the first 20 years of my life in Mozambique, and I never thought I would leave Mozambique, because it was just paradise in a lot of ways, the beaches and the oceans and everything like that. And I was born by the ocean and grew up by the ocean. So, but it just happens that when the Portugal basically when Mozambique became independent from Portugal in 1975, then civil war started. And that's when the things got really difficult. And then my whole family, we had to basically move to Portugal and then settle in Portugal. And then I moved to study in London and then end up here. So thank you. That's, I think, thank you. Okay, John.
Well, I thought that was a pretty wonderful story. I'm sure you guys all agree as well. Also, I do appreciate the tacit offer of a Café Sci in 4 years' time when we're looking at a new mission, right? That's one of the most advanced bookings I'll have ever made. So I'm sure we have some questions. So I'm going to do my best to fight the glare, and so I can see the first one over there, but I'll get to that gentleman there. So that gentleman there? Yeah. All right. Let me paraphrase the question, Afzal, and just for the folks at home on the live stream as well. So the question was essentially, yes, that this satellite is going to provide essentially an optical reference source that is going to allow ground-based telescopes to correct. The telescope the gentleman's referring to, it's Hubble back in the early 90s when it was launched. It had a problem with its mirror.
Yeah, so there's a different problem.
Yeah, and the question was essentially whether this satellite would have been able to help with that.
No, unfortunately, no. So the Hubble telescope was essentially with the mirror that was essentially out of the precision was not properly manufactured. So they basically had other lenses put so that they would basically correct that and make it have better pictures with that. But it was a completely different problem because the Hubble Space Telescope, the issue was not atmospheric aberration, but it was basically the mirror that was not properly.
So yes, Hubble got delivery of a pair of spectacles in about 1992, and that's helped it achieve what it has today.
Right.
There was a person there had a question.
So I got a couple. First of all, while you were talking, there was something on the TV
Right.
showing some people putting electronic boxes together.
Right.
Is that your thing?
That is the ORCASAT. That is the CubeSat, the 2U CubeSat.
And how? So and your definition is a cube is the 10 by 10 centimeter thing.
Yes.
And so that is what?
That is 20 by 20 by 20 by 10 by 10.
Okay. And so it goes up as a cube.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes. A 2 cube. Yeah.
And so then you finish that.
Yes.
And you give it to this third party.
Yes.
Nova, whatever they were called.
Right. The NanoRex.
Nanorex.
Yes.
Okay, and so I'm just trying to get the picture here. They go out, and then they go to, who's available for launching this? And okay, one of them is SpaceX, so they go to SpaceX, and SpaceX comes back and says, I guess here's the price tag for us to do it. Right?
Yes.
So what does SpaceX charge you to send this?
So that is a question for Canadian Space Agency.
Let me just paraphrase it quickly.
Yes.
So essentially, where we got to with the question is, how much does it cost to get it in orbit?
Right.
Right.
How big of what we're dealing with here, right?
Yeah.
So this 2U CubeSat is essentially a 20 centimeters by 10 by 10, like a shoebox, basically. So there is a deployer that takes about that takes about six cubes out of this. So six cubes, like 60 by 10 by 10. And then what we did was we went to the Canadian Space Agency. We tested the fit into this deployer. They call it the deployer. And then once there's a nice fit there is no friction. I mean, because it's a very, very tight fit there. We make sure that there is not much friction there. And then we just delivered to NanoRex. NanoRex took it to Cape Canaveral. And now they're just waiting in their payload system, which is the bigger payload system that is going to the space station. Once it gets there, then the astronauts take over. And then when they do their extravehicular activities, the EVAs, then they basically will deploy from this. They will take the deployer out with the astronaut, and they will just almost like it's shooting it into space. And because it will align with the space station, it will follow a very similar orbit to the space station, which is 400 kilometers at 51 degrees inclination. That's the orbit parameters that we have. And then once it does that, we will wait until it passes through on top of our ground station here, and we'll try to see if we are able to communicate with the satellite. Because satellite, once it's deployed, will have a dipole antenna that will essentially, it's just interesting. The dipole antenna is essentially the tape meter that we buy at Home Depot. That's what it is. But the properties of this tape meter are just wonderful, that you can coil it, and then there is a fishing wire that gets heated in space. Once it gets there is this pre-programmed, and it just deploys the two dipole antenna. Once the dipole antenna gets deployed, then also the magnetometer, which provides stability of the satellite, then that gets deployed as well. So these are only the two moving parts in the satellite. And then we just wait for the communication to start, because there will be enough battery to keep going the onboard systems, and we will try to ping it and to see if we can basically get a response from the satellite. And once we do that, then it's a matter of, then when it goes through certain areas that it is essentially visible to the ground-based telescopes, then they will basically, and the light goes on anywhere between 15 seconds to 300 seconds, depending on the charge of the battery, because the battery will be charging with solar panels. So there will be a cycle of the solar panels charging, discharging batteries. Maximum power that we have on board is approximately 6 watts at any one time.
So when this shoebox is up there, does it actually open up the solar panels then?
No. The solar panels are, so we have tried to maintain the complexity to the lowest possible. So solar panels are just connected to the side of the cube.
So that's the wrapping paper?
That's like wrapping paper in a sense, like, yes. And that's what it is essentially put on both sides, so that we have calculated the orbital parameters to see what is the cycle, what is the charging of the solar panels, discharge, and this will be done over, I think, trying to see each orbit will be 90 minutes, approximately 90 something minutes. So there will be 4 passes over the ground station at UVic here per day.
So we have another question from the person there.
What does it weigh?
So-
And what are the downlink frequencies?
That's a good question.
So let me just going to paraphrase that. So the question was, how much does it weigh? And if you want to listen to ORCASAT, how should you tune your radio?
Yeah, right. So the weight of it is approximately less than a kilogram. Like that's very, very, so it's light, it's less than a kilogram. And then the frequency, the download, the uplink and downlink frequency, I don't remember, but I have to check my numbers, but I don't remember now.
Don't uplink anything. Just listen.
Yeah.
We have another question there.
Yeah, is there just one ORCASAT, and is that sufficient, or do you need several ground stations?
So
Okay. Sorry, Afzal.
Yeah.
So the question was, is there just one ORCASAT, and would you need several for what purpose? What were you thinking of?
For continuation
For
of service?
To sort of give a more complete coverage.
So, but that's a good point that you bring, because one of the issues that we have with ground-based telescopes is that we never get data in real time, so that we get one pass and then that's the data that we are using. Because the atmosphere is constantly changing, the aberration is also changing in real time. So we are not able to get in real time, but we get better than what we have today. Because at the moment they are relying on balloons and stratospheric balloons to get that data, but now we will have even above the atmosphere. So that's the thing. But ideally we would have more, but we have only one ORCASAT. And this is a proof of concept as well. So essentially if it does work, then ideally we would have a good, like large satellite that would be doing that work, that function.
I'm just going to bounce around the room quickly. I'm going to take one here, go to you, and then come back. So the gentleman there.
As I understand it, the object of the game is to determine the atmospheric aberration as far as Earth-based observation is concerned.
Right.
And so will the satellite serve a number of terrestrial telescopes in this way, so that you get to enable half a dozen, let's say, terrestrial
So
telescopes?
at the moment we are just focusing on a couple of them.
Afzal?
Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry. The question was essentially, well, let me think how to paraphrase it. How do the ground-based telescopes make use of ORCASAT, and how visible is it from multiple locations, or is it only visible one location at a
It
time?
will be visible on when it goes over that location of this where the ground-based telescope is. That's when they will be able to see the basically to measure the wavelength of the source for the laser.
Right, so there could be several telescopes benefiting from
Exactly.
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was part of what I was going to
Oh,
ask.
okay.
But the second part, what's the life expectancy of this particular satellite?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. What's the life expectancy of the satellite?
Exactly. We estimate 1.2 years. So it's about a year, more or less. So it is essentially, because it's a proof of concept, in 1 year we want to see if this concept is feasible or not, does it work? And then it will be up to the ground-based telescope to see the use and the value of that, and to see if they want to build a more sort of expensive and with more capability, with more power, so that they can stay with maybe active attitude control. It can control its orbit as well, so that when it's losing due to the drag, atmospheric drag, or there's a bit of drag always, even at 400 kilometers, then it starts losing its orbital altitude, then it tends to boost it up as well. But this will be something that will be done at a different level, not at the academic level.
So what I might, so there's, yes, one more question there.
Okay, so this is a very exciting project, and what I understand you to have said is that you are using a laser on board in order to generate a precise frequency, but you've got a sphere which causes the beam to become more diffuse
Yes.
and is much more spread out. And since the ground-based telescopes are very powerful, they can see even the diffused light.
Yes.
And so really, this is not a space weapon.
This is not a space. No.
Let me. So the comment was essentially this is a very low power laser. This is not a space weapon.
Yeah.
And also, I guess one could extend that. This is not the kind of thing you will see with your naked eye. This is
No,
not
no,
what
no.
people are talking about with Starlink.
Exactly. No, that's
Yeah.
right. So it will be a very, and that's why one of the concerns when we apply for license to put the satellite in orbit was there were so many questions from all the different agencies around the world about having a laser on board. But we were very clear that this was a diffuse light, and there was no basically directed beam at anything.
If you talk to China, you won't have the problem with the questions.
No, I know.
Let me just take one more question.
What are the telescopes that it's going to be taking advantage of instead?
Which ground telescopes? So there's one, I think we talked about the Hawaii one, and there's one in South America, I think is believed are the Arecibo. So these are the two that we have identified potential test cases for this idea.
Now, what I might say is, if there are any further questions or comments, please feel free to join us up at the stage. Before we end the evening by thanking Afzal, let me just remind you that you've got December off, but I'll see you all again in January when we restart our season. We've got a great series of talks coming to Café in the new year, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Have a wonderful Christmas and New Year, if I don't see you in between then. And please, let's join together once again to thank Afzal for a wonderful presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Did you enjoy it? Yeah, it was good. Yeah, it was okay. No, it was wonderful. You had them in the palm of your hand. But see what I mean in terms of, and it's a range of questions. Did you notice? I mean, I noticed lots of people really connected with your story of